So I want to review the South Park episode Petit Tourette, and there's a lot of different things to talk about in this episode. So what happens is Cartman encounters a kid at a toy store who has Tourette syndrome, and the kid Tourette's is that he has the ability to like curse nonstop. Like his disability is that he has like a neurological thing where he curses nonstop. And the thing about it is, making sure my phone's off, is that, there was some criticism of the South Park episode because a lot of people stereotype people with Tourette's as people who just have the inability to not filter what they say and curse all the time. But later on in the episode, they kind of show other people with Tourette's with other like spasms, such as an idiosyncrasy, such as snapping their fingers and twitching their head, or just like screaming or blurting out random things. So I really appreciate what they're doing. And then they also kind of show like how Cartman realizes that having Tourette's is a good thing because he can say whatever he wants, and that's kind of very true to how some people look at disabilities. Just like the episode where the kids decide to not do they can get out of doing homework and responsibilities by saying that they're all ADHD, or ADD. That Cartman kind of has a very prejudiced look at disabilities, and then also too like him just assuming Tourette's is nothing more than people saying whatever they want is also very parallel to people's prejudice about having some disabilities or even like mocking people. Like I remember in college that there were some students who had to who did volunteering for people with a mental retardation, and there were some people who would like imitate how these people with mental retardation would talk, and their idiosyncrasies would be like and other things like that. Like nowadays, there's a lot more education on understanding like how that's very offensive, and that's very disrespectful, and that's very hurtful, and it's also extra disrespectful that you're hurting somebody that really doesn't know that you are insulting them. You get all that through Cartman's character. And then also, too, that later on in the episode, like he says, I got golden ticket. He goes to school and he kind of uses verbally abusive language. So it's kind of like the other issue that you see, that it's very easy diagnosis for children. And then there's people who do have disabilities or don't have disabilities that have parents and school systems that don't realize that they have more, that either their issues are more serious, like they have more antisocial issues, but they're just willing to kind of make exceptions or excuses for behavior. And I've definitely kind of seen that growing up. I remember I used to misbehave a lot in middle school, and I remember always getting passes because people assumed that I was autistic. But I was kind of like a bully in actually elementary school, like my last 2 years, and I remember just always regretting it, but I kind of needed people to be like, okay, that's not autism. That's actually that's actually just antisocial behavior. And maybe I needed like military school or something like that. I do want to just open up that I'm not autistic. I was misdiagnosed with autism, and my thing is that I respond to trauma very poorly, and I moved around a lot. So I've been in a lot of just like extreme environments, but I was misdiagnosed with autism. And one of the reasons why me and my brother were adopted actually is because my parents made a case that we were both autistic, and that helped them get me and my brother adopted, really. So definitely there's been a lot of like exaggerations, but I don't have autism. I was misdiagnosed. I do want to make that clear because I know I've definitely talked about it a bunch of times, but definitely when you kind of see like Cartman being able to say what he wants, it kind of is also, as I said, about like how school systems and people easily diagnose people with disabilities, and they don't really look at root causes, or just be like, okay, well, I think that person's faking or whatever, really. And then also they don't like how look at Cartman's history. You see all the bad behavior that he's done in the past. So I think that a lot of people, if they look at his whole history and look at Cartman the character, they'll be like, okay, well, easily it's more than likely that he's bullshitting and he wants to do whatever he wants, and that's kind of the case. So, that inability to kind of to diagnose and put diagnosis on people, but not really dissect kids a little further. And then also, as I said, that Cartman gets a pass, and he's allowed to use profanity. He's allowed to use ethnic slurs like the word kike. And then also, the other thing too, like disrupt classes. So it's also kind of like talking about like how that other issue happens where sometimes people are allowed to, with disabilities, are they're allowed to kind of violate people's boundaries and cause a bunch of issues, either like verbal, like what would happen if you have a kid that's autistic or has Tourette's and they're using like racial slurs in public school. There may be people who will be like, okay, you got to allow that person to be here and tolerate it because that's progress. Or you may deal with a kid that's antisocial and maybe a sexual predator but has antisocial issues, and they may do something like in public school, like hug girls just to kind of thrust their crotch or whatever. Because I've definitely seen that happen in like the high school like I went to. Like some kids had antisocial disorder and they're kind of doing that. Like they kind of felt like they could say racist stuff, or they kind of felt like they can kind of do things like hug girls and thrust their crotch. The same like as a sexual act, really. So sometimes, unfortunately, as we try to like make accommodations, make people understanding, there will be some people who have mental illness and they don't learn that either their behavior is antisocial, or they just know that, okay, because nobody's going to do anything about it, I can continue doing very hurtful behavior. And that's through Cartman using ethnic slurs. And then also the other thing that happens is Kyle gets in trouble and he's looked at as ignorant and intolerant when actually it's Cartman, and it goes to my points. But also you kind of look at the Boondocks where Riley used the word gay and he gets out of trouble because people assume that he's special needs. So, there's a lot of also, like what you see nowadays is a lot of just like protection of people with disabilities. And sometimes the person who reports the harassment or other issues, they don't get in trouble. Like I work in a psych hospital and sometimes there's patients that say the word nigger over 100 times. There are some patients that kick walls or try to kick staff members or spit on staff members. And sometimes what happens is staff members are like, okay, this person has a disability. They don't want to put kids in jail or whatever, or go through the trouble of putting somebody in jail. And I've been kicked by patients and other things like that. So sometimes that's also an issue we see in our society, as I said, like through Cartman, is this defending people with disabilities when they assault others or they sexually harass or sexually assault or other things. Like, it's a get out of jail free card, which it shouldn't be. And then also there's people like Cartman who are so manipulative and conniving that people go along with it. So like later on in the episode, Kyle goes to a Tourette center and he actually sees people who do suffer and do struggle. So there's also the other side of people who actually have mental illness and they do struggle and suffer, and they do it, and some of them do think that they are just undesirables because of social stigmas. And then also people like who have disabilities or lie to say they have disabilities, just making a bad look for them. So later on in the episode, Cartman realizes that he can manipulate some people to a point where he can go on the Chris Hansen show and spew anti-Semitism disguised as Tourette's, really. So once again, like how some people are manipulative and conniving with their disability, and there's some people who are not. And that brings me up to a tough situation. Like I had a friend who had a girlfriend, and she lied about being abused by him. And what happened was, like, he claims, and what he said was, like, he remember going to court, and they both have, like, mental health issues, and she would say things like she's so autistic that she doesn't know how to say her name, or she needs somebody to explain that over and over, and kept getting accommodations, so that way they kept postponing the court date. He had a lawyer, she didn't have a lawyer, and she no-showed, but she kind of used her disability to kind of manipulate the court system to keep furthering, like court appearances, so that way each time they went to court, like he would have to pay for his lawyer, she did nothing, but also kind of get away with like using a disability to kind of manipulate the court system, get what she wants, and just manipulate people and then get stuff. There are people who will use their disabilities to get what they want. There's also a story in Guilford, Connecticut that I had a track coach that went to jail. And then they proved that a girl was lying. It was the same situation. Like a middle school girl was lying that he sexually abused her. And then they kind of found that she was a compulsive liar. And then also she had a track record of lying about people. And then he got out of it. But yeah, it does happen. And sometimes that's either unintentional Sometimes it is intentional, and sometimes it is a situation where the person is actually a person with a disability actually being a victim of a crime, and then the other side is able to manipulate and just say, "Oh, it's a disability. She's lying or whatever. She's lying or he's lying." That does happen as well. So it's on both sides that people can manipulate, use a disability to get what they want, and then there's also people who can use it against a person with a disability to get what they want. Like, great example in South Park is what happens to Nathan. Like, his parents lie to him and be like, "Okay, well, you know what? You're going to summer camp. I don't understand what you're saying," because they want to get their way, which was dumping Nathan in a summer camp that he hates because they want to go on vacation instead of just respecting his wishes or saying, "No, we need a break from you," type of thing, really. So later on, there's a Chris Hansen show, and during this time, like, Chris Hansen's show was canceled because there was a judge that that appeared on his show, To Catch a Predator, and he didn't want to be exposed as a pedophile and lose his family and then get divorced and then lose his job. So he went to his house, took a gun, shot himself in the head. So they kind of like spoof this where so Cartman doesn't appear on the Chris Hansen show. Kyle and the person with Tourette's kind of like get all the pedophiles to go to like the broadcasting, and then they all start committing suicide because they see Chris Hansen, and it's kind of like plays a dark comedy joke of like of what happened. You can't really call it a tragedy if a pedophile commits suicide. They deserve to die, as some people say, because that's something ruined somebody's life, So they're doing a dark comedy thing about like what happened with the Chris Hansen situation. And then also the other thing too is that Chris Hansen wants Cartman to appear on television, and he says like, what happens to people who don't appear on my show is usually I track them down, they commit suicide. So I do think that which two things to talk about. There's also Chris Hansen exploiting people with disabilities because he does not care about Cartman and his wishes. He cares about the ratings, and he doesn't care that now Cartman is so sensitive that he doesn't want to make a fool out of himself, really. And I also think that even though it's karma, it's also pointing out how sometimes, you see shows like the Maury Povitz, you see people, like I've done competitions like the 48-Hour Film Project, where if there's a participant with a disability, some people may say, "Oh, that's an autistic director," or "that director is special needs," when people don't want that attention, and it's not to make yourself look good, it's for the other side to make themselves look good. Or I remember like going to college, and I've had professors spread rumors about me saying that I'm ADHD or I'm Asperger's syndrome, when that was all just them coming up with stuff. So they look like, okay, well, I'm the great white professor by having a black kid in my class with mental health issues. When ultimately that's exploitation. Chris Hansen is exploiting Cartman the same way Cartman's trying to exploit the disability by manipulating. And then also there's two things that happen, that Cartman goes from lying about having Tourette's to say whatever he wants to actually developing Tourette's-like syndrome, because that happens in psychology. If you get used to a certain behavior, it continues, and then it becomes like an addiction, and then that's what happened to Cartman. And then also the other side of it is now actually Cartman is getting his comeuppance, but of course, because it's Cartman, he doesn't learn to be like, okay, well, now I realize how it's embarrassing that I say whatever I want. I'm in love with Patty Nelson. I touch wieners with my cousin. I'm making it up. I'm making it all up to you. He doesn't realize that now. Okay, well, imagine how other people with Tourette's feel when they kind of go through inappropriate behaviors such as incest, and the whole world has to know about it because they can't control what they said. Like, Cartman doesn't learn his lesson. And I also think that that's kind of like maybe the point, is that there's some people like Cartman who now develop Tourette's-like syndromes, and he's going to like work with a psychiatrist, get out of it. He doesn't learn empathy and compassion to be like, okay, well, now it's not funny, so now I need to just not do something disrespectful like mock people with disabilities. And then the next part of it is the other thing too is that I like the ending where Clyde and the kid with Tourette's, they actually become friends. And I think that it also gives you hope that there are people who just see past people with disabilities And that's kind of a happy ending. And even like with Kyle does that too with the kid with Tourette's. He sees past him and he sees him as a regular person. And that's also hopeful because there's a lot of younger people who understand disabilities, who grew up around it, who have a lot more education. And they also kind of understand that it's not easy to have a disability. So there is that hope that more people actually learn to be like Kyle or be like Clyde, where they actually just say, okay, well, you're you. And I see past that, and I actually respect you for you. You know, like, for example, I've had a friend named Mike Normandin in high school, and he knew that I was going through a hard time, and he knew that I was processing a lot of things. So a lot of times when I've acted antisocial, and I reacted antisocial in high school because I was overcoming, like, memories of trauma and a lot of just build up anger because I did not grow up in a household that allowed me to express how I feel. So I bottled up feelings and I drove myself crazy with it. That there was friends like Mike Norman that really helped me out. Or sometimes, like, I was talking to my friend JV, and we both, you know what, we both have had to overcome traumatic pasts and being adopted out of situations where we had bad parental figures. So yeah, you know, so yes, there are people who are understanding, and like I have some friends who are fellow filmmakers who have Asperger's syndrome, and some people have Down syndrome, and then there's people like me who are like, you know what, I grew up with a lot of like hurt because people thought that I was autistic. I meet people who think that I'm retarded, and I have no problem disrespecting to my face. I've worked with filmmakers in Connecticut who've taken advantage of me and treated me like I'm stupid. 48-hour film project in New Haven, and some other things where people just know that I'm maybe behind socially, take advantage of me, treat me like I'm stupid. So I've learned when I meet other people with disabilities not to treat them badly because I've gone through the same pain. And I also have an older brother, complicated situation. He may come off as autistic, but also he has been hurt and betrayed and a lot in life. So it's more than just slapping a disability label on him. So, you know, we should learn from people who have disabilities to be more sensitive. If we have a disability, we should learn to be sensitive to others. And then also because there's a lot of people who grew up in a very politically incorrect time, you know, like pre 2000s almost, I would say, where there wasn't a lot of education on disabilities. People would call disabled people retarded and make fun and treat their kids like a laughing stock. I did grow up with some of that. That, you know, it's great that we're a lot more educated on disability. So, you know, I do think that this episode's also hopeful that we all learn to treat people with disabilities a lot better.